Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Inside segment. I'm Harold Fisher. We are at the Political Roundtable tonight, looking at some of the top stories of the week. And there is a lot to get to. My guests are Misha Green, managing editor of the Washington Informer, Dr. Sharice Nelson, political analyst and author of the new book, Visibly Invisible, The Black Women of the Congressional Black Caucus, Brandon Tinsley, national politics reporter for the Capital B, and political analyst Douglas Sloan. Thank you all so much for joining this conversation. Let me start with the big news today, and I'll start with Misha. DC Council Chair Phil Mendelson announcing a deal with the Washington Commanders, some changes to the deal that Mayor Muriel Bowser presented this past spring. Misha, this is moving really fast.
This is moving fast, but I mean, we have to remember that some people didn't think it was moving fast enough. You had earlier this week or either late last week, Comer reaching out to Comey, to the DC Council, and particularly to Chairman Phil Mendelson, saying, "Hey, we absolutely need you all to make a decision with that." And I'm like, the DC Council has so much going on. They know that the RFK Stadium bill is important. The fact that there is now House oversight getting involved, I know that's going to put some fire, but I'm really shocked to see that Phil Mendelson said that this August vote is going to happen before they go on recess, made it clear today. And I think that has a lot to do with some of what the president was threatening earlier this week, and showing that the DC Council is still involved. I mean, obviously this whole transfer itself, I think, was a very big deal from the getting district oversight from the federal oversight. And so, I think that was a big power move on Chairman Mendelson's part. And so we just got to see what develops next. But he is to the tune of $949 million. It looks like the District of Columbia will be supporting the RFK Stadium.
Well, you did have it right, the first time with James Comer and the Oversight Committee push. From your perspective, this is definitely your wheelhouse, Brandon. How much impact do you believe that letter from Republican Oversight Chair James Comer had on this process?
Yeah, I think from some of the conversations that I've been tuning into and reading different statements, I think it did have a pretty sort of meaningful, significant effect. I think, like Misha was saying, that this is something that has been percolating for a while, and so it's interesting for it to all of a sudden get this much momentum and speed. I remember I was reporting a story on the Prince George's County executive race earlier this summer, and this was one of the issues that came up for people in Prince George's was the effects of moving the stadium, and even then it was something that was big, really big, especially when it comes to businesses in the area and people's ability to sort of invest in the area, but it still seemed kind of far away-ish, uncertain sort of what the timeline is. So I think now, to fast forward, not even 2 months later, and for us to be where we are, it is a pretty striking, I think, change in the timeline.
Doug, your thoughts on this deal and what it could possibly mean to the community? I'm not even going to try to talk about the cornucopia of numbers. I think Misha said, we're talking about $949 million coming back to the city over the course of 30 years, for the city. Certainly nothing to sneeze at. But you know how it is, man. Making sausage is not pretty.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because, I'm a native Washingtonian, and I'm old enough to remember when Abe Pollin proposed building a new arena in downtown DC in a pretty dilapidated area that was Chinatown at that time. It is still Chinatown, but it was dilapidated back then. And Abe Pollin came and said, listen, I'm a multimillionaire, you may even have been a billionaire at that point. Don't worry about the cost. I'll build the stadium. You just give me some tax breaks. You give me some tax increment financing. You give me some breaks on the taxes and I'll build a stadium, and hopefully it will renovate the downtown area. And that's exactly what it did. Now we're dealing with a team of billionaires that are interested to come in, and they're team owners that want to come in and build the stadium with city dollars involved. And, people get confused. They're like, oh, well, the city should have to put up for the stadium. But, I don't know if everyone completely understands the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. 1 million seconds out of your life is 11 days. 1 billion seconds out of your life is 31 years.
Whoa,
that
break it down,
is
Doug.
a significant amount of money that these guys have. They can build this stadium with no sweat, with no problem, with no serious dent into their bank accounts if they want to. In the meantime, the District of Columbia is scrambling thanks to Trump and the White House cutting programs, cutting funding. We're now looking at going into a deficit for next year and going into debt. So, most blue states and cities are really scrambling behind Trump. And of course, red states as well. Everyone is in debt, seemingly, except his very rich billionaire friends. And so I just think it's really eye-opening that, they're asking for that much money from a city that will be in debt next year when they do have the money to build, and it wouldn't hurt their bank accounts at all. But, we're going to see how this turns out. The vote still has to happen. I don't know if any of the council members would actually be bold enough to step forward and kill the deal, but stranger things have happened with the DC Council and in DC politics.
But yes, and the chair said today during his press conference, he said, we have the votes. And it required, he says, it required him to make, these changes, which kind of claws back more money for the District of Columbia to get to yes. And because getting to no means that shell of RFK Stadium would be sitting, and that Aisha Braveboy with the county executive for Prince George's County, she saw just 2 days ago, she said, hey, look, I see an opening. With all of this talk, well, it appears, at least for now, that opening is closed. I do want to talk about it. Go ahead, Sharice, you were going to say.
Yeah, I definitely want to add in the conversation from more of a larger landscape, right? Because you guys have really zoomed in on the DC factor. But I want us to stretch out, right, and think about the Oakland Raiders who didn't make this deal, right? I want you to think about, right, because I grew up in the West Coast. I've lived all over the country. As you know, I lived in DC for 8 years. So I'm very attuned, right? Yeah. But I'm very attuned. But I want us to think about the fact that I want us to think about two factors here that lead right back to the book, right? I want us to think about the Black women that are involved, right? I want you to first think about the Black woman in Oakland who is Lee, right? Barbara Lee, right? Who was inside of the Congress for many of years, right? In the book, but now is mayor of the city of Oakland because Oakland didn't find a way to keep the Athletics, which is the baseball team in the city. They weren't able to keep the Warriors inside of the city, and they weren't able to keep the Oakland Raiders inside of the city, and they moved to Las Vegas, right? So they lost 3 teams right down the street from where I grew up. So what I want us to also think about in this wrestling of this money, which I agree is a whopping figure that hurts our hearts, I want us to also think about the Black woman on the other side of the table, who is Meryl Bowser, who we have seen be strategic in the fights that she's made in the first Trump administration dealing with Trump, right? So I'm not saying that the council's not going to play a role, and I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we know a Black woman in a position of trying to resurrect a city because they weren't able to get to the finish line on deals, versus a Black woman who's now in many ways in the driver's seat about how to make this deal work for the city, since it seems like it's the inevitable.
I think that is such an excellent point, and I appreciate that 30,000 foot view. And I'll start with you on this next issue. President Trump tried to throw a wrench into the works when he was talking about possibly scuttling this deal if the team doesn't change the name back to the Washington Redskins from the Commanders. Certainly, Sharice, we're unsure about what power he may have in doing that. But just talk about the fact that he just came out of left field with that.
I would disagree. He hasn't come out of left field. This is Donald Trump's playbook. I think that we keep lurching at every outlandish thing he does, not understanding it is a part of his playbook, right? Every time he there's a lead on any level of policy piece that his billionaire class friends want, anytime there is a gain for that, there has to be in some ways a call out to the culture wars that exist in these United States. Because if there's not a call out to the culture wars, the poor white people who are not going to get cut into any of these deals start to wake up. So, and we're seeing that. And I guess I want to say that to you is because in Plano, Texas, where James Calatisio, I think his name is, right, Christian, white presenting down there in Texas, had a rally in a tranche red area and had white folks who are poor coming out wanting to hear the message, right? And so every time there is this lurch, I think, to protect or to coax his billionaire class, there has to then be a reaction of a dog whistle or just a clarion call in that ways to the culture wars and the race baiting to allow for these deals to even seek the light of day. Because now we're having a discussion about turning them back to the Redskins, which is probably not possible or even probable, but we're focused now on that. And then the money will slip right by us, and this billionaire class will be satisfied.
What do you, Brandon? What do you think about this Redskins situation, and do you think that this will grab the attention of James Comer, or is he just going to kind of ignore that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that was just said in that, like, there's, I think a lot of sort of like what has been happening over the past couple of weeks, you can almost view it through this sort of lens of deflection or distraction from other issues, right? Because I think a lot of experts, analysts have said that Trump actually has very little power, can't really do anything to sort of intervene with this deal besides try to sort of like place pressure on people. You know, it's in the hands of the DC City Council. There isn't really sort of a legal way for him to intervene in this. And so what you have is, I'm trying to remember how someone framed it earlier, but this sort of gesturing toward other things that can apply pressure to the situation, that could make people sort of like lose sight of maybe more sort of like tangible sort of like issues or problems that they might have with something that's happening with the deal. You know, not unlike some of the other conversations that have been happening in recent weeks, right? With the release of the MLK documents, with Epstein, but like all these different things where it's a way to sort of get people to look elsewhere, away from sort of like some of the bigger issues that might be a little bit more impactful in people's everyday lives.
Well, listen, hold on, because I want Misha and Doug to weigh in on that issue, because it also dovetails into some other things, including Epstein, and there's just so many juicy nuggets to talk about today. So we're going to take a quick break. Don't forget, you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation at the Political Roundtable. My guests are Misha Green, managing editor of the Washington Informer, Dr. Cherise Nelson, political analyst and author of the new book, Visibly Invisible, The Black Women of the Congressional Black Caucus, Brandon Tinsley, national politics reporter for the Capital B, and political analyst Douglas Sloan. Okay, Misha. Let's talk about this issue about the Washington Commanders and President Trump's talk about reverting to, the Redskins. And let me just say that we cannot forget that there is a large segment of the community, not just the Black community, but the broader community that considers the term Redskins racist. And then there are some who do not. Go ahead, Misha.
Right. Well, I mean, as everyone said in the first segment, it's a very clear sort of sleight of hand where he is doing something that is just distracting from so many of the larger issues. But to your point, we can't take out the racism that is there. And, Cherise talked about race baiting and the dangers that come from that with all people, but I think ignoring the fact that it has always been very offensive to at least a group of people, and then the president noted that he said, "Oh, Indians love the name," as if he was then speaking for the indigenous community. I think it's absurd, and there's so much danger that really does come when you're talking about people's cultures, people's backgrounds, what is so incredibly meaningful to people. And so I don't want to ignore that as much as we know that's not the real problem, and that Donald Trump really cannot do very much when it comes to the final decisions and federal funding, et cetera. But I also think that it's really important for the people around the nation and really world to see how the president is sort of wielding his power in a way that can be very, very disarming. And when I went to, I still call it the Twitterverse, but X post his Truth Social threats over the weekend about the name change, and people really thought that he had power, and there were people answering questions about what he can do if it doesn't happen, and why we just need to suck it up, and why Mayor Bowser has to take it. And I'm like, there's nothing factual surrounding what you all are talking about now, but that's what happens. The alarm that arises, the conversations that come up that really do distract from the things that we need to keep our eyes on, like the fact that the matter is that Trump is still trending about his comments about the Washington football team, but not about the fact that Chairman Mendelson has just made this almost $1 billion announcement. And I think that's really important because, again, this is affecting the lives of more than 700,000 Washingtonians, and hopefully the future of this growing city. And that's the real problem. And so I do want to just note that there are a lot of nuances there. Of course, a lot of concerning things about what the president thinks that he can do, but more importantly, that there are people that believe that.
Yeah. Knowledge is power. Doug?
Yeah. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that this has become even more of a hot button issue now that the team is actually performing well. They had 12 wins last season. They have a new young quarterback that is ranked the best second-year quarterback in the league right now and had one of the best rookie years in history.
And he went to LSU.
And he went to LSU. Yes, he did. And and so that makes this even more of a hot button issue. Obviously, bringing back that name and him saying that they're going to change the name back to Redskins, or rather that they should, is a distraction from some of the many much more important issues that have come to the fore regarding his administration, regarding Trump, regarding the news. Specifically, his deputy attorney general is interviewing Ghislaine Maxwell, I believe, as we speak.
Yes.
That is a very big issue, given that Attorney General Pam Bondi notified Trump that he was on Epstein's list, in that list a few weeks ago. So Trump is doing all types of things to try to draw attention away from that. And this Redskins name change is just one of many. It's par for the course for Trump. But, as educated, intelligent viewers of the news and citizens, we need to keep our eye on the ball and on the important issues like the Epstein saga, like what's happening with the beyond terror sentencing, and like some of the other issues that Trump is dealing with right now in his administration.
Well, since Doug mentioned it, let's go right into this. I will say, and I'll start with Brandon about this. The information that came out yesterday with the Wall Street Journal saying that Attorney General Pam Bondi told the president that his name and others were in the Epstein files, and that does not necessarily mean that there was any wrongdoing. But politically, Brandon, let's just talk about the politics, not the legal stuff, but the politics, the optics. For some reason, I'm getting Watergate-esque feelings about this, where no, the president's goose is not cooked, but things are simmering, and there's some seasoning in the simmering.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is it's this really interesting tension between sort of what I think a lot of Republican officials are trying to do versus sort of like what their base is calling for. But it's also a lot of sort of maneuvering that almost calls attention to itself in a way that like maybe it wouldn't if people weren't doing those things. Like it's almost like what do they call, like the Barbara Streisand effect, where when some of these things sort of like come out, it's just like, oh well, like they're, it's not an instance of wrongdoing, but also at the same time it's calling attention to something in a way that like maybe you don't want it to call attention to that. And so I think there's this really interesting sort of political dance that's happening where a lot of Republican officials, Republican Party leaders are trying to actually reel in what has been happening with their base over the past few years, as Trump seems a little bit more or a lot more skittish about what's in the files or his connection to Epstein, trying to increase that bit of distance in a way that I think makes people pay attention to in a way that's, maybe more detrimental to what they're trying to do than if they weren't. But it's almost this interesting sort of like caught between a rock and a hard place. But I think, a lot of people have been saying this is a clear instance of an issue of their own doing, a problem of their own doing. And so I don't know. I think it'll be really interesting to see how Trump officials navigate this situation, especially knowing how quickly Trump can change his mind about things, right? If someone seems like they're becoming a little bit too politically radioactive, how does Trump sort of punish them, distance them, all these different sorts of ways that people try to stay in Trump's orbit, but it is very easy to fall out of it, I think, especially with a case that is as ever evolving as this. So, I think even though this started as something that, I don't know how many people were paying attention to it, maybe a month ago or so, but it's quickly becoming something that's, I think, sucking a lot of the oxygen out of the room. And also hence why we're seeing a lot of these attempts to deflect, as Sharice was saying, the sort of like the race baiting, but all these other ways to sort of push away from the situation. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this continues to unfold.
Sure. Harold, let's
go ahead. I'm going to let you respond. I'm not even going to ask my question.
Let's just lay it out here. Trump knew he was in them files. I gotta get black on you real quick. Trump knew he was in
Get?
Yeah. Trump knew he was in them files the first time around. And one of the biggest reasons he stacked the court the way he did at the Supreme Court level was to ensure there would be no consequences as long as he got reelected. That's what this whole game plan has been about from the very beginning. It's been about his debt. It's been about his debt. First time, his indebtedness to Russia, right? And the second time, his indebtedness to Elon Musk and whoever else went and paid his bills, right? On that side of the fence. When it comes to this other stuff, that's the entire reason he had to win as president, and they basically made him king. And as far as falling out of the orbit is concerned, that's why we're looking at an autocracy rising its head, because as soon as you no longer serve the king's interest, you're pushed out of the kingdom, right? I mean, it's just, I mean, and I think this goes back to some basic pieces that Misha was talking about when it comes to what people even know is possible, right? When you don't know, when we stopped teaching civics in 8th grade, right? As a college professor, I would be at the college level teaching students, and I would ask them, when's the last time you had a U.S. government class? In the southern states, it was 8th grade. So by the time they get to college, I'm reteaching the entire system versus trying to elevate their understanding of the nuances on how the system works. So as Misha says, most people don't even understand the idea that because DC is not a state and they get their money from the federal government as a district, then the influence that Trump has is little to none, because it is really a congressional issue. But if you don't understand civics, then you don't understand the moves that are being made and why it's say this. I mean, look at this, why I do this over here.
Yep.
Yeah. But to the point, and I do want to stick to the Epstein piece. So, Misha, briefly, why do you think that we are hearing, from the Speaker Mike Johnson's, he said yesterday, we're trying to be transparent here. We're not sending, the House home early, although they are. But at the same time, then you have a subcommittee subpoenaing Ghislaine Maxwell. Thank you. And do you believe that it's the constituency, the MAGA constituency, that's really keeping this alive, because this issue involves the harming of teen girls and women? Is that the thing, or is it that, I'm asking, or is it because Donald Trump said what he said about, we're going to release this and I don't have a problem with this, and now it seems that he is backing up? I guess that's the thing. Why does this thing still live? Is it because they believe that Donald Trump is lying to them, or is it because they do believe that women have been harmed as a result of this?
Well, I had to laugh because we know the MAGA constituency does not care about whether women are disrespected. Look at what their leader does and says and has historically said, even on camera and recorded, about what he could do to women. And so
what was that? Never mind.
I'm not going to say it.
We're not doing
and this is for the late Daily Drum, late night Daily Drum. But no, my thought is that yes, they're disappointed. I mean, it's a classic case of, my boy Billy Shakes said it the best. William Shakespeare said, "Methinks thou dost protest too much." I have my nicknames for everyone. Like
Billy Shakes, I like that. Okay.
Like Donald Trump is always DJ Trump, but I think they knew that DJ had been talking about this big issue for quite some time, which was the Epstein case, and distancing himself from it, which was sort of absurd from the very beginning. But because he was making such a big deal about this, there is a level of disappointment. You have conservative commentators and people who were completely supportive of the president, who are now going to conferences and things like that saying somebody was lying. I don't know if it was Pam Bondi, I don't know if it was Donald Trump, but somebody better fess up. But this has nothing. And again, it's very interesting because the president's lies are normally not the priority for his MAGA base. But I think in this instance, because it was something that he criminalized in many ways and generalized the Democrats to be a part of, with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton involved, that he distanced himself so much so and made it so much about the Dems being these villains with Jeffrey Epstein that now they want some answers. And, you know, had he not made it the big deal that it certainly has always been, I don't want to diminish what this case was and all that's around it, but had he not been, you know, again, when there were so many incredibly important things that were happening to the American people during his campaign, and that was such a major part, you know, when he was telling people, I don't know what Project 2025 is, and other people were saying, no, we've read this very long document. And when all of that was happening in the other sleight of hand that we know that Donald Trump was doing, that was the time when I knew Donald Trump had something to do with Jeffrey Epstein. And so it has, it doesn't shock me. And now his base is trying to ask for answers at a time where, you know, I think it's really interesting because, again, there's so much happening and we do need to not diminish how important it is. But I also think that, will this be the nail in the coffin for Donald Trump? I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. Listen, we've got to let Brandon Tinsley go, but Brandon, I appreciate your contribution to the program. Looking forward to having you back on. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, anytime. Take care, everyone.
Sure thing. I want to go now to Doug about this issue. Just briefly, Doug, because again, there are so many other things that are happening around the Epstein case, and here's the thing that I am concerned about, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but maybe I watch the X-Files too much, but how do we know that this Epstein file won't disappear with some guy in a black trench coat and a notched peak hat with some dark shades in a garage somewhere?
Well, I think that's the beauty of the Epstein situation. We have plentiful evidence of Donald Trump being friends with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, they were best buds hanging around. Epstein was down at Mar-a-Lago. Trump was on Epstein's Island. I mean, there's reams of photographic evidence of Trump sending him a letter on his 50th birthday. And the beautiful thing about all this is that the conspiracy theorists and the hardliners on the right were hot for Epstein long before Trump ever ran for office. They've been on this Epstein kick for a long time, and they just knew that all of the Democrats in power were friends with Jeffrey Epstein, not just Bill Clinton, but Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. And of course, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama have absolutely nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, but they just knew that Nancy Pelosi, all the powerful Democrats were on the list and best buds with Jeffrey Epstein, and they were all child pedophiles and everything else, which is just as wacky as Hillary Clinton having a child pedophile ring and doing human trafficking in the basement of Comet Pizza Parlor on Connecticut Avenue. If you've ever been to Comet Pizza, you know there's no basement. It's just absolute madness coming from the right wing of the Republican Party. And, Cash Patel, Don Bongino, some of the other whack jobs over there on the Republican side, they have all been on this Epstein thing for years. And they just knew that the FBI and the deep state and the Democratic Party and the government was keeping the truth from the American citizens. And now you got a Republican majority in Congress, both in the House and the Senate side. You have a Republican president. You have control of those files, which Cash Patel said the FBI had. Where's the release?
Yeah.
And it is driving a wedge in the MAGA universe of, well, Trump is obviously now engaging in subterfuge regarding hiding these Epstein files and saying they don't exist. And now Rupert Murdoch in the Wall Street Journal and right-wing media seemingly turning on Trump. Trump is suing them. And the Wall Street Journal said, yeah, Pam Bondi notified Trump weeks ago that he was in the files. So it really is a bad situation for Trump. That's why we're seeing him trying to, like the good doctor said earlier, say, look at this over here. We have this issue over here. He has Tulsi Gabbard accusing President Barack Obama of treason, which is insane. Right. Yeah, all these things to try and draw attention away from the Epstein files. But the bottom line is, these Republicans in MAGA Nation have been on this Epstein thing for years now, and they're not about to let it go, no matter who tells them to do so.
Harold, this is the time where we need Raynard Jackson. This is the time we needed him on the show. Okay?
Yes, for those of you who don't know, yes, the Republican strategist. Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to bring him back. Listen, I don't have a lot of time, and I still have some other things I want to get in quickly. And I'll just have kind of each of you respond to this, to some of these other ones. Sharice, Breonna Taylor and Brett Hankinson, the sentencing of the former Louisville, police officer, and then of course we have this Jacksonville, Florida police stop of that young man, William McNeil Jr. The problems with police and Black people are still an issue. Your thoughts, real quick, about both of those.
I'll just lead off with the student because the student was a student at Livingstone College. Livingstone College president made a statement about that, put it on social media. And so he was an HBCU student right there, and they're dear and close to my heart. When we're thinking about this all the way across the board, we have to just consistently remember that the police force, as we understand it, morphed out of slave patrols. So the way that we see Black people and the way that we see how they must be monitored has just morphed into different generations.
Misha, your thoughts about these two stories, the Brett Hankinson sentencing. The Justice Department wanted to give him literally 1 day time served. He got 33 months and 3 years probation for the violation of her civil rights. Do you think that his gunshots were not responsible for the death of Breonna Taylor? Do you think this was a fair sentence?
I mean, I think that it's difficult for me to say what is fair. Her family has been consistently fighting for justice, and Breonna Taylor should still be here. And so nothing is quite fair. I'm really happy that the judge did not follow the president's suggestion of 1 day time served, but at least recognize the severity of it. And I do really hope, we know how law works, which is that you have to have certain cases to start setting precedents. And I just can only hope that this is a continued wake-up call for those people who were originally hired as slave patrols to know that there are people like Ben Crump and Harry Daniels who are fighting back in Jacksonville in a very major way. You see how I tried to match both of those topics together. I really tried, but it's really happening. There are folks holding law enforcement accountable. We saw how outraged not just Black people were in 2020 with George Floyd. And yes, we saw that people knew and understood what happened because it was on camera. We've had a couple different angles from this young college student. And I really want us to be clear when we're looking at this footage and these videos that this is somebody whose life and his family and friends' lives has been turned upside down. And so while we can still celebrate that he's certainly here, it was police brutality. And that's what they've been trained to do. And so I'm hoping that cases like Breonna Taylor's will at least raise awareness that, look, we're going to hold you accountable when you violate people's civil rights.
In these last few minutes, I want all of you, and I'll start with Sharice, to talk about the passing of Malcolm Jamal Warner and what he meant not only to the community, to the culture, but his place in entertainment history.
Yeah, I just think that as someone said on social media, and I can't remember who, Malcolm was Black Boy Joy before it became a hashtag. Right?
Yeah.
He showed us that there was an acceptable way to be Black that wasn't rigid or rugged or born out of trauma or pain. And his ability to be fully Black. I mean, everything about him, from telling his sister off, from messing up his shirt, like everything, from walking down those steps on the Cosby set and night and day, like all of that. He embodied in many ways what it meant to be young, gifted, and Black. And he was closer to us, I think, than Chadwick, because Chadwick felt far off. He felt like untouchable. He felt like a superhero. Whereas Malcolm, who's affectionately known as Theo, felt like our big brother.
Yeah. Misha, real quick.
Well, I just want to ditto everything that Dr. Sharice said, and note that I think that Malcolm Jamal Warner's passing has brought attention to how important Black sitcoms are to not just Black culture, not just American culture, but really worldwide culture. Losing Malcolm Jamal Warner, yes, felt like we all lost our big brother, but it also really hit how many of those narratives were so important for the world to see in the Cosby Show, and to see Malcolm Jamal Warner play it out in such a beautiful way. I saw an interview recently where he said he thought that Theo was always so corny until he heard other people offer him feedback about how inspirational the character was. And so, of course, he had a long career after the Cosby Show, and I just want to celebrate that he was able to touch so many different art forms and continue to lift up his life and legacy.
Doug, I'll end with you because you and I are closer to his age. He was our boy.
Right. Yeah, it's very tragic, very unfortunate. He had a lot of acting left in him. He had a big career ahead. So, I would hope that people continue to remember him as they eulogize him, and that he will not soon be forgotten, because his start in acting, his first big role was on such a monumental stage with the Cosby Show. And it really was so important in that it brought a Black upper class family into the living rooms of America, which had never been done before in that manner. And so his role on that as the only son of Dr. Bill Cosby in that show, and his wife, who was a lawyer, Claire Huxtable. I said Dr. Bill Cosby. Dr. Huxtable. Claire Huxtable was huge. And so it's a tragedy, and I hope that we just continue to remember him, as we will with Chadwick Boseman, who's a superhero. And, we're going to have to move on.
Thank you all so very much. I really appreciate your participation. Dr. Sharice Nelson, Misha Green, Doug Sloan, and of course, we want to thank Brandon Tinsley as well. That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, July 24th. I'm Harold Fisher.